iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hello and welcome to the iHeartPodcast Speaker Series, where each week we get a chance to talk to some of our favorite podcasters, creators, producers. And this week is a special treat for me because we're getting to chat with one of our longtime creators and partners, Jo Piazza. She's created multiple podcasts with us, everything from Committed to Fierce to Under the Influence. We actually have a couple more in the works. And today we're going to be hearing about a podcast called A Passion for More. So we'll get into all of that. But Jo, thanks for joining us for a few minutes today.
Thanks for having me.
Jo, we've been big fans of yours for quite some time. I think we first started working with you because we discovered and fell in love with your book, How to Be Married, where you traveled the globe, talked to different people about their idea of marriage, and it inspired our first podcast together. And so before we get to A Passion for More, I want to revisit that a little bit, just for those that maybe haven't gotten a chance to check out Committed, which we've been doing with you for 5 years now. It's an incredible podcast, but it's quite relevant for today. So maybe if you could just take a couple minutes and talk to us about How to Be Married and how that became your first podcast with us.
Yeah. And you guys approached me, like you said, 5 years ago, which in podcast years feels like for an entire very long marriage ago. And, we decided to kind of switch up the book, How to Be Married, and make it just narrative storytelling around real couples and real marriages, getting into the nitty gritty of how they make it work, how sometimes they don't make it work. And we've had incredible couples, from a pair that was blown up together in the Boston Marathon bombing, a pair of Olympic ice skaters. We had Nick Offerman and Megan Mullally. We had couples who met in heroin addiction rehab. We had porn stars. We had couples where multiple couples where one of the spouses was in prison. And, the show was just so raw and honest. And I think that's what our audience related to, because we never see inside a marriage, and we're all desperate to see inside someone else's marriage. And now I think there's something like 140 episodes available.
Yeah. It's one of those shows that we knew there was a great first season, right? We knew there were these great stories, but weren't 100% sure whether we would keep finding, or you and the team would keep finding, these great stories. And they just kept coming, and hearing from so many listeners one that you didn't mention that I just thought was such a, sweet and interesting and unique story was, a woman that would visit this bench and a homeless person was basically hanging out near there, and they started conversations, and, you fast forward several months or a couple of years, and they end up married. It's just like every one of these stories was a unique story in itself. And I just loved every single episode of the podcast. I didn't realize that we had gotten to that number, but it's pretty incredible looking back and seeing the catalog of them.
It was oh my gosh, you just reminded me of another one of my favorites, competing baseball sports writers.
Right.
They were writing for different newspapers and then fell in love. And it was like a romantic comedy just waiting to be written.
Yeah. So it's fantastic. And like most of what you work on, it's quite layered in the sense that every story is not just focused on the sweetness of it. Now, in every episode, you're going to find that element of it. You're also going to find the struggle. You're going to find the pain that many of them have experienced, but each one is such a unique story. And that's why it was so interesting when we started this conversation around this new idea for a podcast, which is called A Passion for More, which is really exploring infidelity and specifically affairs carried out by women. And because it's been, largely in culture, a very taboo subject, and really there's more conversation around men and infidelity. And so we want to talk a little bit today about why that is, why we decided to explore this topic. And so maybe we'll start with that. Like, where did the idea for this show come from, and why did you decide to jump in?
There's a great book called A Passion for More, where a researcher named Susan Shapiro Barish interviewed hundreds of women for the past 30 years about why they chose to have extramarital affairs. And what she found is that it's just as common for women to step outside of their marriage than it is for men, maybe even more common. It's just a thing that culturally, A, we don't talk about, and B, we stigmatize so much more than male infidelity. And when I read the book and started talking to Susan, what we realized is that women need to hear these kinds of stories because it's happening so much more than we think it is. And if women don't hear about it, then it also stays kind of bottled up. It stays secret. It stays shameful. And so we took Susan's book as the starting point and then started interviewing women about what makes them decide to have an affair. These were stories I had never heard before, but I do have to say that now that we started How to Be Married when I first gotten married 7 years ago next week. And now that I'm in my mid-40s, I'm hearing all these whispers about all the moms at school and all the things that they're doing outside their marriage. And I want to know everything. I want to be a fly on the wall for all of those stories. And that is what we're trying to bring into this podcast. But we're also trying to dig into why. What makes you do this? Is it a complete myth that our spouse can be our everything, that they can be our soulmate and our tennis partner and, the best sex we've ever had? And also, what benefits are women getting from this? Because it's different than men. We talk a lot about the male midlife crisis. You get a convertible and a new girlfriend. But these women, almost every interview, they're telling us how empowered they feel, how they're doing better at work, how confident they are, how much happier they are in their marriage because of what they're doing outside their marriage.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. And I know to jump in on this, it was very important to you that you hear directly from these women in their own words. Can you talk a little bit about that rather than just sort of reporting on it, actually hearing directly from them?
Yeah, well, I think that has to do with the magic of audio, right? Like, how can we use audio exactly the way that it's intended to, spark maximum emotion and empathy? It was important to hear these women tell their own stories, again, to feel like you're not just listening to some I'm sick of talking to experts. I'm sick of listening to experts. I want to hear real human beings. And these women, most of them are talking about this for the first time. Most of them have never even talked about this to their friends or obviously their family members, but so there's something really honest and raw and special about them talking about this out loud for the first time and not just hearing an actor recount it or hearing an expert dissect it. And we have experts in each episode, but our experts are really trying to give us a historical context more than a psychological context in a lot of cases. The show is a judgment-free zone. We're not judging anyone for doing anything. We're just letting people tell their stories, which is what I think podcasts do so well. Yeah.
Was it difficult to get these women to tell their stories? I mean, I'm assuming there's sort of a range where some are ready to jump in and tell them, some are a little more hesitant. What has that experience been like?
It's not easy to source people. It is. We had to do a lot of digging through our various networks.
Sure.
To find the women. But then once you start talking, no one wants to shut up. I mean, it's very similar to Committed in that once you start talking about someone's marriage, they can go for hours and hours. And so once the floodgates kind of open with these interviews, once you find the women, they want to share these stories because they don't get to talk about it. So a lot of the interviews take a really long time. We're boiling them down to their essence. Each episode's going to be about 30 minutes. Which I maintain is the sweet spot for a podcast, but I know so much about their lives, and it's a really diverse crowd too, which I'm excited about. We've got all different ages, socioeconomic groups. It was so important to us not to just be like, here's 7 moms in Brooklyn.
Right. Yeah. Here's 7 moms from your school, your kid's school, basically. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that being difficult to source, but it's amazing what you've managed to pull together with the people that you've told us a little bit about. And I mean, what do you think it is about women and having affairs that has been so unexpected and surprising and in many ways just seen as taboo? Like, why has this been such a difficult topic to talk about?
Well, women and sexuality generally is a taboo topic. Women expressing themselves in a sexual manner has been taboo since the beginning of recorded media. I mean, let's go back to especially we do a lot of research into great literature and what happens to women who have affairs in great literature. They're always killing themselves or getting publicly shamed. Look at Hester Prynne. Scarlet Letter was written by a man about a woman having an affair. And still today, women who have affairs in movies, something bad always happens to them. There's this layer of fear on top of it. And because there's also culturally, especially in America, an idea that marriage is sacred, right? If you get outside kind of the American point of view, we've talked to a lot of, women in France where they have different ideas about what the marriage compact means and what you can and cannot do. But Americans have a very puritanical idea about what marriage is, for better or worse. Again, we're not judging anyone, but we think that if we don't talk out loud about these kinds of experiences, then we're not benefiting anybody.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What was most surprising to you as you've had, just dozens and dozens of these conversations? What did you not expect through these?
The level of empowerment, really, level of empowerment that each and every woman feels just by doing something for herself. Again, we actually have a whole episode where we compare infidelity to self-care. We're like, this is the new goop, people, because it's for a lot of women, they talk about it the way they would talk about wellness, the way they would talk about taking time for themselves, using the Peloton, doing meditation.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people might not want to hear that, but I also think that there's not enough ways we can empower women in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to hear that this is just one way that women are regaining their identities, particularly women who have lost their identities in a marriage after becoming mothers. And so that common thread has been really surprising and fascinating to us.
Yeah. And you talked about having experts on, which I think was a really smart, addition to the show, that it's not just hearing from, each of these women, which is also incredibly important. But in terms of hearing from the experts, what were you hoping to uncover, and what's been interesting in some of those conversations?
Yeah, and we have experts from anthropologists to professors of sex and sex research. I just talked to one, and she runs a lab out of Duluth, Minnesota, and she says that she still gets, kind of mocked by her other colleagues as like a smut researcher because she dares to research sex. But we had Wednesday Martin, who's a wonderful cultural anthropologist and author on, and she goes through all of the studies of women, female primates, everything that we know, actually know scientifically about the female sex drive is wrong, because we've always assumed that, women have less of a sex drive than men. And she goes through all of the studies and says that's absolutely not true. She debunks every single myth, like backed up with really great research. And the cool thing about this podcast, I think each episode does two things. One, you're hearing a great story. Because my other job is as a novelist, right? And so I want to immerse people in a world when they're listening to something. And you are really in these women's worlds. You hear about their marriage, you hear about why they did this, and then you hear some of the deliciously juicy details, like you're overhearing the mom on the playground, and you just walked away with a great story. But the other part of it is the excerpts we bring in will give you something really interesting to talk about at a cocktail party. Be like, I just learned this fact and it blew my mind.
Yeah. And I could see in terms of the, if there's a relatability scale, a lot of times in podcasting, we do tell these amazing stories, but many times they're just, they feel like these crazy, unusual stories that are fascinating, but not necessarily relatable. I would imagine this podcast is sort of the opposite of that, right? Where all of these stories, your listeners are hopefully either feeling connected to it from their own experiences or through experiences of those they know very well. But has that been your experience as you're hearing each of these stories?
Mm-hmm. And I found all of these women so relatable, just because I think that there is a kind of universal experience for women once you get married, once you start to have kids. And I think when you hear, oh, we're going to tell stories of women's affairs, you think, oh, that's crazy. Like, I have nothing in common with these women. I would never. And then you hear them tell their stories and you're like, oh, wow, you're exactly like me.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. I imagine this also being one of those shows that, much like Committed or one of our podcasts like Family Secrets, as people hear them, you're going to start hearing regularly from those listeners who have their own experiences and are ready to be brave and tell their own stories in a way that they've probably never spoken about it. Like you said, with many of the people participating here, I have to imagine that's going to happen as soon as these first stories are told.
I think so. I really do. I mean, a lot, like you said, with Committed, we were like, we've got a good first season. And then the stories just started pouring in for Committed. I think that's going to happen with this show too. So, and each story is a little bit different. There's so many commonalities. Like I said, the empowerment thread that I was so surprised by, but also everything is just a little bit different. The other thing I have to say that blew my mind, and we're doing a whole episode on this, is technology. How have affairs changed because of technology? Think about it. 10 years ago, you would have had to cheat with someone in your social group, really, or a fling at a conference or something. But now you have all of these apps and websites that connect married people looking for something else. You can choose what zip code you feel like traveling to. You can get a burner phone. You can get like a secret WhatsApp. Like, technology has completely changed how you do this. There's that website, Ashley Madison, which is where married people find other married people looking for affairs. And for our technology episode, we still haven't done it yet. So I don't even know if this is going to work. Our producer, Allie, is just like, probably right now, like, oh my God, what's Joe going to say? But I'm trying to get, I like want to like physically try to like sign up for an account and then see what happens and like see who shows up and then tell Nick that I signed up for it.
Yes, yeah. Just a little heads up, buddy. Yeah.
Can you check my profile for this? And then we'll record the whole process.
And would you still be interested in me if you read this profile as someone else? Yeah.
Would you be into me?
I love how you always pull Nick into these experiences. You certainly did that as well with Under the Influence, which that's what makes these shows so good, is you throw yourself into these discussions. It does make me think about, this feels like it could even come together as a book. And, something we didn't mention at the top here, I guess we did in the sense of reading How to Be Married, but while you're successful as a podcaster, you're perhaps even more successful as an author with books like We Are Not Like Them and Charlotte Likes to Win. And of course, we mentioned How to Be Married. What is that for you, just sort of stepping away from this exact concept for a second? How is it different for you as you decide to jump into putting something together as a book, putting something together as a podcast? Do they sort of fulfill different things for you? I'm just curious to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I guess at this point in my career, because I've done all of the different things, I just think of myself as a storyteller. Mm-hmm. And so with every story, with every crazy idea I have, it kind of comes to me which way it wants to be told. Some stories are totally a novel or a nonfiction book or just a magazine story, and other ones are incredible audio pieces. And this is one of the ones that I think you want to hear it. I don't want to read it. And it was the same way with Committed. I wanted to hear people's stories and the emotions in their voice. But the coolest thing about podcasts now is then you can translate them to other pieces of work. So I think this could become, it's based on a book, but it could become a whole different kind of multimedia project or even a TV show. I mean, Committed was optioned by ABC. We worked on that TV show for a long time. We're still now like kind of revamping it, still alive, to try to turn that into a TV show. Under the Influence is now, I'm working on the pilot for that. So
it's amazing. Yeah. There's so many ways to tell these stories. So yes, this will be a book. Maybe it's a theme park. Like, who knows, Joe? Like,
it could be a theme park. That would be, I think a lot of women would go to that theme park.
You think so? Yeah.
I do. I just don't think it would be legal in America.
Probably not. We'll table that one for now. But I should mention to everybody that this podcast launches on October 11th. We are super excited for this show to come together, as we always are in working with you, Joe. Any final thoughts on the podcast before we let you go?
No, I think we covered everything. I was telling you before we started recording, I think about these interviews every day, and I think that's such a good sign when like something else in my life is just like, oh, remember that thing you talked about and that everyone else is going to get to hear soon. So yeah, I'm really excited for it to come out.
Oh, well, we are as well. So again, it's called A Passion for More. First episode drops October 11th. But Joe, thanks for spending some time with us.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll be back next week with another great conversation.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.